for showing. I'm Rick Wilson, the director of Scientia, and I'd like to thank you for attending today's Bochner Lecture. The Bochner Lecture is named after Solomon Bochner, who was the beloved professor of mathematics at Rice for many years, and he died in 1982. The Bochner Lecture series lecture occurs once a year and is a special part of the Scientia's lecture series. This year's series is on the topic of facts. It's a timely, exciting, and contentious topic. In the political realm, we've watched partisans bicker over what constitutes a fact, or an alternative fact, if you will. In the scientific realm, we've seen conflict over which facts support conclusions about climate change. And Sciencia's colloquium series on facts looks at this topic from multiple perspectives. Well, today we're very fortunate to have Elizabeth Loftus, distinguished professor of the University of California, Irvine, speaking to us. Her topic is the fiction of memory. Professor Loftus earned her PhD in psychology from Stanford University and currently holds positions in the departments of psychology and social behavior, criminology, law and society, social ecology, and cognitive sciences. Professor Loftus is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, a fellow and former board of directors member of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, among many other memberships. She's also won numerous awards, including the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences Award for Scientific Freedom and Responsibility in 2010, the Gold Medal for Life Achievement in the Science of Psychology in 2013, the Isaac Asimov Science Award from the American Humanist in 2016. She was listed as one of the 100 most eminent psychologists of the 20th century by the Review of General Psychology in 2022. To balance this, in 2002, she was also named, let's see, how would I put this, by the Orange County Metro as the hottest 25 people in Orange County in 2002. How you can top that award is beyond me. Nonetheless, she has won many other awards equally deserving. She's published more than 24 books and monographs, and possibly over 500 refereed articles. She's written the textbook on eyewitness testimony and has cautioned all of us about the fallibility of memory. Her work has brought about lasting changes to the legal system and what constitutes admissible evidence. As you'll discover, she's wide-ranging in her work and is here to give us some insight into memory, true and false. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Loftus.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here at Rice and yeah, okay, good. Can you hear me? Is the mic working? Good.
It's not, but we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Pleasure, Rice. I would say the whole, and tell you a little bit about the work that I and my collaborators, primarily my graduate students and other collaborators, have been doing in the area of memory. And let me just start by saying, obviously, memory is something that's very important to all of us. Without memory, you wouldn't be able to get up in the morning and know how to go brush your teeth and how to make the coffee, figure out where your keys are. Memory is that repository that stores the happinesses of our past experiences and some of the sadness. But sometimes memory goes awry. And so let me ask you, particularly for those of you who don't know about the work that I've done, do you think that I could make you remember things that didn't happen? Could I make you remember, for example, that when you were a child, you saw a cat stuck in a tree and you rescued that cat? If this had never happened to you, could I make you remember that it did? Could I make you remember that you were attacked by a vicious animal as a child? Could I make you remember that as a teenager you committed a crime and it was serious enough that the police actually came to investigate this crime? Could I make you remember that just last week you played a game and you cheated at that game and you took money from the bank when you weren't supposed to? I mean, many people intuitively think, I don't think that I would be able to remember these kinds of dramatic experiences if they never happened to me. But we'll see how you feel in another 40 minutes. Because I'm here with this interdisciplinary crowd, and I've been thinking, and you can't turn on the TV these days without seeing something about politics, and it's something about Trump, and he's done something that he's accusing Hillary of. When they were running against each other, Trump had an attack ad against Hillary in which he called her a big fat liar. He said she lied about Benghazi, she lied about her emails, she lied about landing in Bosnia. And I remember watching that ad thinking to myself, well, I don't really know that much about Benghazi or even the emails, but I did know an awful lot about that accusation that she lied about Bosnia. Because what he was referring to, what Trump was referring to in this attack against Hillary is this. When Hillary was running against Donald, I probably should use their similar names, not against Donald, when she was running in 2008 for the Democratic nomination against Barack, she had a memory that she told on the campaign trail. This was a memory she had of landing in Bosnia, and that's going to be what Trump is going to refer to later on. So Clinton says, I remember landing under sniper fire. There was supposed to be some kind of greeting ceremony at the airport, but instead we just had to run with our heads down to get to our vehicles, to get to our base. Now, I don't know what Hillary was thinking. She did go to Bosnia. She didn't go by herself. She went with other people, and some of those other people were taking photographs and even videos. And so here you can see her being greeted by children, a peaceful greeting ceremony. People are smiling. She's there with her daughter Chelsea in the days when Chelsea had curly hair. Now, what is going on here? Obviously, the pundits are going to have a field day with this, and some of them gave her 4 Pinocchios, one in particular, obviously accusing her of deliberate lying. Why 4 Pinocchios? Well, because there was no corkscrew landing, as she had described in great detail. There was no sniper fire, no canceled airport reception, and she was not the first lady to go into a war zone. Well, Hillary came out with an explanation. She pretty much had to, and what she said is this. She said, I made a mistake. I had a different memory. I made a mistake. That proves I'm human, which for some people is a revelation, she said. And I love this example because it shows us that all that education, all those IQ points, all that Yale Law School degree does not protect you from having false memories. Trump, on the other hand, he began telling false stories during his campaign. It was then, for example, that he said, I saw in Jersey City, New Jersey, thousands of people were cheering as the Twin Towers were coming down on 9/11. That wasn't true. He has yet to come up with an explanation for this one or for any, I guess, of the 2,000 falsehoods that have been cataloged that he has uttered so far. And from the point of view of somebody who's usually willing to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, to say maybe they do have a false memory, and I hope to create that sense of tolerance in some of you by the time my now 30 minutes left are up. I still can't figure out what is going on with him, and maybe we can open up that to some discussion. So I'm not usually, I love to collect these examples, but I'm not usually thinking about famous people and the mistakes they make. Usually I'm thinking about memory as it plays out in legal cases. So I spend a lot of time, for example, thinking about cases of wrongful conviction. One database, a famous one in New York, the Innocence Project, has cataloged information on now, as of 2 days ago, 353, I think it is, known cases of wrongful conviction. Individuals who spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years in prison for crimes, and then DNA testing revealed that they are actually innocent. And when these cases have been analyzed, and they've been pretty thoroughly analyzed, more than 70% of those cases are due to faulty human memory. So this is one way that I like to try to motivate my students to become interested and to appreciate the importance of human memory. So how do we study memory? Or how do we study when memory goes awry? Because there's certainly, thousands and thousands of studies of memory, and many psychological scientists and others who've been studying memory for a long time. But in my particular program of research, we've used a couple of paradigms for studying memory. One of those paradigms is now called the Misinformation Paradigm. So what happens here is people get some event, our research witnesses will get a simulated crime, a simulated accident. Afterwards, they will be exposed to some post-event information, PEI, and it might be misleading information, and I'll give you some examples. And then after the exposure to this post-event information, our witnesses will be tested to see what they personally remember about that crime or accident that they actually were exposed to. And so they do see a simulated accident, often they're filmed accidents, and afterwards exposed to this misinformation. In one of my earliest studies done decades ago, we showed people a simulated accident. A car goes through an intersection with a stop sign before hitting a pedestrian, and the police come and so on. And by asking a single leading question that refers to it as a yield sign, we get lots of people to believe and remember they saw a yield sign controlling the intersection, not a stop sign. Sometimes people have said, maybe out there in the real world, this is a complaint that many psychological scientists get who do experimental work. Maybe these controlled laboratory studies aren't really telling you about the real world, real people exposed to really stressful, traumatic events, and what their memories would be like, or how easily they might be influenced. And that is a question that sometimes in the field we refer to as the ecological validity of the work. I mean, does it tell us about the real world? One way we can answer that and respond to that, if we're not doing it based on theory or based on some other method of responding, is to actually go out and do your study on people who are experiencing a very stressful experience for one reason or another. And I've had a chance to do that in a collaboration with a psychiatrist named Charles Morgan, who had access to a really unique group of research subjects. Morgan had been studying soldiers, our soldiers, who are learning, they're going to survival school. And they are learning what it's going to be like for them if they are ever captured as prisoners of war. And survival school is an extremely harrowing, stressful experience for these soldiers. Among other things that happen to these soldiers when they are in this multi-week survival school is they undergo a 30-minute aggressive, hostile, traumatic interrogation. And at the end of survival school, I managed to talk Morgan into putting some misinformation, post-event misinformation, into their environment to see what these trained soldiers who had experienced this stressful event would do in response to the post-event information. And so they might have had their interrogation conducted by the person on your left. We'll call him the real perpetrator, actual perpetrator. But they get misinformation that it was the person on the right. And we supplied that misinformation in a fairly clever way. Look at this photograph of your perpetrator, the one who conducted that hostile interrogation that you had for about 30 minutes. I want to ask you some questions. Did he give you anything to eat? Did he give you a blanket? Did he let you talk to anybody else? These soldiers are trying to answer those questions. The trick is, this is a photograph of a completely different person, that guy. And we got lots of these soldiers to now identify the misinformation photo as the person who conducted the interrogation. We also planted objects into the minds of these trained soldiers, objects that did not exist in that interrogation room. So there was no telephone in the interrogation room, there was no weapon, there were no glasses on the interrogator, and without misinformation, the soldiers rarely claimed later on to have seen those objects. A few percent of the time they did, but mostly they said, no, I don't remember any phone, any weapon, any glasses. But for the soldiers who got misinformation about those objects being present, now lots of them began to say, I saw a phone, or a significant minority saying, I saw that weapon, I saw those glasses. And so what this study is showing is that even these trained soldiers undergoing a naturally stressful experience can be made to succumb to post-event misinformation that will supplement, distort, transform their memory. And we now refer to this as the misinformation effect. This is kind of a cartoon graph that shows you that the misinformation effect is just the phenomenon that when you expose people to misinformation, it depresses their memory performance. So why is this important? It's important because out there in the real world, misinformation is all over the place. We get misinformation if we've talked to other witnesses to some critical event. Witnesses do that after a crime or an accident has happened where multiple people have viewed it. Witnesses get interrogated by police officers who have a hypothesis, an agenda. They can communicate that to the person they're interviewing, supply details that even inadvertently that are perhaps misleading. If you happen to have experienced a high publicity event and there's television or other media coverage about the event, that's another opportunity for new information to enter the witness's memory and cause an alteration, a transformation, a distortion, or even just a supplementation in the prior memory. So in the 1990s, we began to see in our society an altogether more extreme form of memory problem. Some people were going into therapy. Maybe they were depressed. Maybe they had an eating disorder. They had some problem. But they were coming out of this therapy with a completely different problem, namely memories of horrific abuse, sometimes claiming they were raped for years, sometimes claiming raped in satanic rituals, where they had to participate in animal sacrifice and baby breeding, baby sacrifice, the works. And when these cases began to appear in legal settings, in courtrooms around the country, and people who were defending individuals accused in these cases had a chance to delve into what actually happened and to try to figure out, I mean, where are these bizarre memories coming from when there was virtually never any corroboration. It looked like some kind of therapy was involved in many of these cases. Therapy that involved procedures like guided imagination, sometimes sexualized dream interpretation, sometimes hypnosis, sometimes just exposing people to false information. Was it this suggestive therapy that could potentially be leading these patients to develop these bizarre memories? And what would that look like? What would that look like? And so I wanted to study this process, and it's not that easy a thing to do. So imagine you want to study, how is it that somebody starts to really believe and remember that daddy was a high priest in a satanic ritual and forced you into animal sacrifice, baby breeding, and even raped you himself? As you know, college and universities where research with human subjects is ongoing require that you go through some human subject, some ethics evaluation. Even in the name of science, we can't do whatever we want to people. It didn't seem very likely that my human subjects committee would look too kindly on a proposal that we're going to make particularly our female students believe that they were raped by their fathers in satanic rituals. Was not going to fly. So we needed to do what psychologists do, what many psychologists do, find an analog, something we could plant in the minds of people, something that, if it had happened, would have been at least mildly traumatic, something that would not be so offensive to the members of the Human Subjects Committee that they would refuse to let our work go forward. And we eventually came up with the idea that what we would do is there wouldn't be any event to begin with, this new paradigm, but we would ply people with suggestions about this made-up event, and then we test them to see what it is they themselves remember about the event that we claimed happened to them, our first study, in their childhood. And the first study we did, now a couple of decades ago, was to plant a false memory that when you were 5 or 6 years old, you were lost in a shopping mall. You were frightened, you were crying, you ultimately were rescued by an elderly person, and you were reunited with your family. And I won't go into the details too much about the details of how we did this back then, but we used a fairly strong form of suggestion. I mean, if I were going to try to plant this memory in Fred from the psych department here, Professor Fred, I would say, Fred, we've talked to your mother, and we found out some things that happened to you when you were about 5 or 6 years old, and we just want to see what you remember and how it compares to how your mother remembers these events. And then with the parent, we would have gotten several true memories and then a made-up false memory about being lost in the mall that the parent would help us construct. We found after 3 suggestive interviews, about a quarter of our subjects fell sway to this suggestion and began to remember all or part of this made-up experience about being lost in the mall. Now, the critics came out to attack this study before we even published it. I mean, in between, when I first presented it at a scientific meeting and the publication, they were out complaining. And some of them had a pretty good complaint. They said, look, getting lost is so common. Can't you just show us that you could plant a false memory of something more bizarre, more unusual, more traumatic than getting lost in a mall? And other investigators came forward, and we too responded to that challenge. A group in Tennessee planted a false memory. You nearly drowned. As a child, you nearly drowned and had to be rescued by a lifeguard, succeeding with about a third of their subjects. A group in Canada planted a false memory that something as awful as being attacked by a vicious animal happened to you as a child, or a serious indoor or outdoor accident, succeeding with about 50% of their sample. They're getting really good. I collaborated with an Italian collaborator and with Italian subjects. We planted a false memory that when you were a kid, you witnessed a person being demonically possessed. And just a couple of years ago, a pretty dramatic study, another Canadian study, they planted a false memory that when you were a teenager, you committed a crime, and it was serious enough that the police came to investigate the crime, reporting that 70% of their sample of ordinary people fell sway to this suggestion and developed all or part of this made-up memory about having committed a crime. Just last year, a group of investigators in 3 different countries came together with a collection of these rich false memory studies, used a common coding scheme. They did what they call a mega-analysis. It's not technically a meta-analysis, but just a mega-analysis. They found 423 subjects across these studies who had been exposed to these strong manipulations, and of those 423 subjects, they report with a common coding scheme that about 30% developed a memory of this, a belief or a memory of this actually happening to them. Actually, the first was a memory, and the second group, another 23%, developed a belief that it happened. And often that belief that it happened is a first step towards developing what feels like a real recollection. So we've done many other types of studies that use different paradigms for planning false memories, often modeling the techniques after what I would see going on in this suspect therapy that was leading these patients to develop these bizarre memories and to bring these cases into courtrooms. So we've used guided imagination. That's another way to get people to believe and remember that things happened to them that didn't. We've used dream interpretation, and we can get lots of people to remember things that didn't happen. Others have used hypnosis. Exposing people to other people's memories is another method for getting people to remember that things happened to them. Think group therapy, and other techniques that sometimes go on in therapy and sometimes don't. I moved universities about 15 years ago, and when I got to my new university, University of California, Irvine, I and my then postdoc and graduate students decided what we wanted to look at was the repercussions of having a false memory. And so I've done that for the last decade or more. Now, by that I mean when I plant a false memory in you, what effects does it have? Does it affect your later thoughts, your later intentions, or even your later behavior? And we decided to study this by planting a false memory that you got sick eating a particular food. When people do get sick eating a particular food, they often don't want to eat that food as much anymore. Well, what if we could plant a false memory of you getting sick eating a particular food? Maybe we would see evidence that you would avoid that food. And so in our early studies, we planted a false memory you got sick on pickles. In another study, you got sick on eggs. In another study, you got sick on strawberry ice cream. And people didn't want to eat these foods as much. In several studies that we did and were done in Canada by a completely different research group, you can actually put the foods in front of people and see what they eat after they develop a false memory of getting sick, and they don't eat as much of those foods. I remember when I first saw the results from some of these studies, I thought, this is great. We could be on the brink of a new dieting technique here. Move over Atkins. But in any event, we haven't taken it in that direction. That'd be for some. But one of the things we did think is, if you can plant a false memory you got sick, then maybe, and that makes you not want to eat the food and actually eat less of it when you have an opportunity to eat it. Could you plant a warm, fuzzy memory about a healthy food? And maybe people would want to eat more of it. And we did exactly that with asparagus. We planted a warm, fuzzy memory about asparagus, and people wanted to eat more asparagus. And our asparagus paper has actually one of my favorite titles. It's called Asparagus, a Love Story. So with this ability to plant information into people's minds and create what we now call rich false memories, there are a lot of questions that people have asked me about this phenomenon. And maybe you're thinking of some of these questions. So people ask all the time, is there any way to tell the difference between a true memory and a false memory? You might think, for example, this reminds, I wanted to do, I was reading my LA Times, my local newspaper, earlier this month, and there's an article in there with all the Me Too stuff that's happening, and there was an article that was responding to the accusations against Woody Allen, and somebody wrote a letter to the editor. It was a therapist who wrote a letter to the editor, and the daughter of Woody Allen was complaining that when she complained about the fact that he had molested her when she was a child, that people didn't believe her and nobody believed her, and why are they believing these other stories and not her stories? Anyhow, this therapist writes in the course of this letter, as a therapist who's worked with many sexual abuse victims, I can recognize when the stories are valid, and Dylan Farrow's story rings very true. I don't know what's ringing in her mind, but in terms of the science, the bad news is it's exceedingly difficult to tell the difference between a genuine story and one that is a product of some other process. So you might think that we would be more emotional about our true memories than the false ones that have been suggested to us. But with my former PhD, Kara Laney, now Professor Laney, she planted false memories of things that would have been upsetting if they had happened, like you witnessed your parents having a physical fight when you were a kid, or you accidentally caught them having sex. She found other people who'd actually had these experiences. She got the emotional reactions from those who were expressing the true memories versus the suggested memories. And the overwhelming conclusion from this massive dissertation project was the similarity in emotional ratings for the false memories and the true memories. Maybe you think the brain knows. If we could just put somebody in an fMRI machine while they are recounting a true memory versus a false one, would the brain be able to, would there be any difference in the neural signals? Well, teaming up with Ocado and Stark, two people who know a lot about neuroimaging, we did put people in a scanner as they were recounting true and false memories, and the overwhelming impression of the results of this study, published a few years ago, is the similarity in the neural signals for a true report versus a false report. You might wonder if we're all susceptible to these kinds of manipulations. Well, we had a chance to test a group of people who, if anybody would be resistant, you would think they would be. This is a group of people who have superior memories. They've been studied by the neuroscientists, neurobiologists. They used to call themselves physiological psychologists, but now they like a fancier term. Jim McGaugh and his collaborators. They've been studying people who have superior memories. These are people who can remember just about everything they did every day of their adult life. They're pretty extraordinary people. They've been featured on 60 Minutes a number of times. They've been studied by the former physiological psychologists on the other side of my campus. And my lab and their lab got together to put these HSAMs, they call them, highly superior autobiographical memory subjects, into some of these false memory studies. And the great thing about this study, actually, I just knew going into it, it didn't matter how it came out, it was going to be interesting, because these people were either going to be resistant, and that would be interesting, they'd be susceptible, and that would be interesting, they'd be resistant on some tasks, but not others, and that would be interesting. And when we subjected them to a number of false memory tasks, the superior memory people, and we had gender matched controls, the overwhelming impression of these HSAMs were just as susceptible to developing false memories as their controls. You don't even need all this deception. I think you can see that this type of work does involve a lot of deception. We've talked to your mother, Fred. We found out some things that happened to you when you were a child, or even in the misinformation studies. We refer to the stop sign as a yield sign, or we show them a photo of somebody who's completely different. But you don't need all that deception. In some recent doctoral work from Stephen Frenda, one of my recent PhDs, just having people create a story about their childhood or a lie is enough to get these false memories developing. So what Frenda did is he had subjects try to tell a story, just make up a story. When you were a kid, you saw a cat stuck in a tree, you rescued that cat. We want you to write out your story, and we want you to be convincing. And to do well in this task is to be able to convince people that this really happened to you. So these people, write out these stories. Maybe it's about 250 words or so. And even that is enough to get people to later on now have memories of rescuing a cat in a tree as a child. So we're getting pretty good at this mind technology. If we can manipulate people's memories, if we can plant entirely false memories into the minds of people, and I could envision a world where, with a combination of our behavioral techniques and maybe some pharmaceuticals, we might be even better at this. Although some of my other colleagues at other universities have are pretty good at it when they can get 50% or more of people falling for these suggestions. Obviously, it raises a number of ethical questions for us as a society. And so one of those might be, when should we use this mind technology? And should we ever think about banning its use? So I started with you by asking, could I make you remember? Could I make you remember that as a child you rescued a cat stuck in a tree, if that never happened, that you were attacked by a vicious animal, that you committed a crime as a teenager and it was serious enough that the police came, that you played a game last week and cheated and took money from the bank when you weren't supposed to. I didn't tell you about that study. It's beautiful work that was done by Kim Wade from England and her graduate students. And using doctored photographs, she got lots and lots of people to believe and remember that they stole money last week from the bank when they, not stole, but they took money from the bank when they weren't supposed to. So I've been working on these problems for quite a while. I was told to leave some time for questions, so before I do, I leave you with one take-home message. I mean, I actually did a TED Talk on some of this material and was trying to think then if I was going to be speaking to just a very broad audience about what I have learned over these many decades of working on these issues, it would be this, that just because somebody tells you something and they say it with lots of confidence, and they describe it in lots of detail, and they express emotion when they say it, it doesn't mean that it really happened. It doesn't mean that it really happened because false memories have these same characteristics. And this kind of realization, I think, has made me a little more tolerant of the mistakes that family, friends, or others around me sometimes make. I don't immediately assume that they are lying, like the 4 Pinocchios that Hillary Clinton was given. I'm ready to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're not exactly lying. Now, I have to say, I haven't done that with everyone, and I published an autobiography earlier this year, just something for the annual review of psychology, in which I really call somebody out as a big fat liar. But so I'm not like totally swept away with this idea. Anyhow, I do feel though that such a realization might have made a difference for some of those innocent people in the Innocence Project that were wrongfully convicted, spent 15, 20 years in prison because of somebody's faulty memory. They're the ones who really learned the hard way this lesson, that memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing. How about that PowerPoint?
So we do have time for a couple of questions. Raise your hand. I'll bring the mic up to you and let you ask.
Hi.
Hi.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So with the rise of the Me Too movement and many celebrities and other politicians stuff coming out saying that we need to believe women, we need to believe that these people have been assaulted, we need to believe their stories. But what you just said, you can't necessarily believe everything that you hear. So how can we strike that balance as one of just a community of peers that are just reading the news, but also maybe as specifically as Rice University students or people doing studies, like what would be the balance of that?
Well, you know, this is a very tricky thing for me. I mean, I realize that I may have opened a door to a Me Too question, especially by talking about Woody Allen and his daughter. And I thank you for clapping at the end of this talk, because I kind of feel in this environment of Me Too, people are not as receptive to thinking about the problem of false accusations as they were 5 months ago. And so it's making my job harder. But I will tell you what I think is going to happen next. Just like with the campus sexual assault problem, where we did have problems of women being assaulted as students on campuses, maybe not getting the right attention or empathy or sympathy, regulations changing to help women feel they can come forward. At the same time, we began to see many, primarily male students, being punished unfairly. There are now at least 200 civil lawsuits being brought by male students who were punished, expelled, or suspended, or whatever, who are saying, well, who are claiming they are innocent. Civil lawsuits that are, wending their way through the courts. So, we're going to have these Me Too's right now. We're right in the beginning of this, but I would anticipate a giant wave of wrongful termination cases as the next big thing that we see. And when that starts, I don't know. So that's not a very satisfying answer, but I think to place that particular type of accusation in the context of other similar accusations is possibly a little helpful.
Have you thought about the use of this mind technology, as you call it, as a possible treatment for PTSD?
Well, I actually have thought about that. After we published our asparagus study, I got a call from one of the largest wholesale retailers of vegetables in the country, wanting to know, we've got a problem, the guy said. We have vegetables that people just think they don't like and don't want to eat, like leeks. Could you help us make people want to eat more leeks? And I said, if you would like to fund a study that would, involve, supporting the graduate students and things like that, we could do the study with leeks. But he was willing to offer all the leeks I needed, but not a lot of extra money. But more to the point. When I began to talk to therapists about this idea of planting false memories and maybe helping make people feel better, happier lives, and I would get the response that the therapists can't deliberately deceive people even for their own good, even if it's for their own good. So if that's an ethic, I understand that. But one time I was being interviewed, I said, there's nothing to stop a parent from trying this out on their obese or overweight, teenager or child. And I got such flack. My same old enemies came back and said, there she goes again. She's now advocating parents lie to their children. And my response, hello, Santa Claus. But but even if it's a more serious response, which would you rather have? A kid who is obese, who has shortened lifespan, high risk of diabetes, heart problems, all the things that go with that, or a kid that has a little bit of fiction in memory. And I think for me, I know what I would prefer, but maybe that's because I already know how much fiction is already in there. But do you have any thoughts about changing the ethic? Okay, so that's sort of what I ran up against in my attempt to think about how we might affirmatively use this to help people live a happier or healthier life.
Hi.
Hi.
So your work really, it makes me wonder whether there's a way to counteract it, right? So have you found any sort of reliable way to convince people to second guess things that they're told from memory? People in juries, for example, to second guess what they're getting from eyewitness testimony?
Well, first of all, in terms of the science, there is some evidence that if you warn people about this phenomenon and the malleable nature of memory and post-event suggestion, the problems, that they can temporarily resist some of these suggestions. Maybe not completely, but certainly to some extent. Problem is people don't walk around all the time with those warnings in their head. So you can see the effects of it in a short experimental period, but you can't expect, like maybe in 5 minutes from now, if somebody tried to do something to you, it wouldn't work. But next week, when I fade into the background of your consciousness, you will be susceptible again. In terms of educating juries about the memory problems, there are a number of efforts to do that. The National Research Council, the research arm of the National Academy, produced a report called Identifying the Culprit, in which they suggest greater use of jury instructions or greater use of expert testimony to try to alert jurors to some of the scientific findings about memory, particularly where lay people have been found to have beliefs that are contradicted by the scientific findings. And there's been some progress here. So, for example, in New Jersey, if you are a defendant in a criminal case in New Jersey, and there's an eyewitness issue and a possible potential for suggestion or a problem. The judge has to give the jury not written, but very carefully crafted jury instructions that almost sound like a psychology lecture. Memory doesn't work like a video recording. I mean, it's the kind of thing that that an expert could testify, that a professor might teach in a memory class, and educating them about some of the factors that can distort memory. So far, the testing of those instructions, there are now at least 3 tests that have been done, master's type theses and so on, have shown that it does lead to more skepticism about memory, but so far they're not that good at getting people to distinguish a good memory situation from a poor one. Discriminability, which is what you'd like to see.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, and a nice reminder that what are facts is a critical long-term question. I'm interested in, you found that 20 to 30% responded to these. Have you done any studies of the 70 to 80% who were resistant to that kind of suggestion?
Well, first of all, yeah, in many of the studies, or when you do the mega-analysis of those strong suggestion studies, you do see the 30%. But that's after 3 suggestive interviews. Some of this suggestive psychotherapy goes on for years. And so they're getting so much more kind of suggestion. We've done, not we and others have done lots of studies looking at individual differences. I can tell you, for example, that if you're somebody who tends to have lapses in memory and attention, you are somewhat more susceptible. Tends to have lapses in memory, and there's a test for that, and it has items on it like, how often is it you can't remember whether you said something or just thought about saying that thing. So if you self-report lots of problems with that, you're a little more susceptible. If you're low in cognitive ability, as measured by standard IQ tests, somewhat more susceptible. You never get correlations more than about 0.3 or 0.35, so they're just tendencies to be more or less susceptible. But then I know it's anecdotal, but I can find you many examples. Then you point to somebody, like Hillary Clinton, who developed a false memory about landing in Bosnia, or Brian Williams, who had the $5 million memory mistake, I call it, because he remembered being in a helicopter that crashed that didn't happen, and got suspended as the most popular nightly news anchor, $10 million a year job. He was suspended without pay for 6 months. So lots of very intelligent, successful people have been shown to succumb to this kind of suggestion.
Oh, thanks for a great talk, Beth.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
There was a line of research on false memory that was done here at Rice in the 90s by Roddy Royer and Kathleen McDermott, where false memories were implanted, but not through presenting false information or the other techniques that we were talking about today. Do you think that it's the same underlying process going on there?
No. No, but I'll say more. Here's why. Okay. No, they, of course, Roddy and Kathleen, spawned this fabulous line of work using, it's referred to as the DRM paradigm, and for people in the room who don't know what this is about, you study a list of words like, sleep, pillow, bed, drowsy, so on. And later on, when I ask you to remember those words, many people will remember a word that wasn't on the list, the word sleep, because it's highly associated with the words that were on the list. And this is an easy false memory to produce in people, so it's a favorite classroom demonstration. It's easy to read those words to people in fMRI machines, so you can do all kinds of things. And now maybe thousands of studies have been done using their word lists. there are now at least 4 or 5 studies that look at whether or not, I mean, if you are likely to say you saw sleep or heard sleep in a list when you didn't, are you also likely to be the one to say you saw the yield sign instead of the stop sign? No. The correlations are very low to 0. And so that tells us that there is no kind of false memory trait that emerges that's going to make you succumb to these manipulations in these different types of paradigms. The largest correlation I ever saw between a DRM and a misinformation was a study that I did in collaboration with Chinese collaborators involving hundreds and hundreds, a large sample. The correlation ended up being, of 0.12, ended up being significant only because of the sample size. But most of the other studies that use more typical sample sizes get non-significant correlations. So that's what makes me think some other process must be going on in these 2 types of situations.
So we have time for one last question.
In the same way that you can effectively implant like false memories, would you also be able to affect more abstract things like a person's baseline personality traits, or for example, convincing someone that they had a limp and then having them walk with like a limp, or making them like more upbeat or something?
Well, that would be a very interesting question. Trying to think about the Human Subjects Committee, first of all. Would they let you do your study? But I think it's we can suggest all kinds of other things to people. I've never heard about the limp. Right now, for example, we can suggest to people that they were less anxious than they actually were in a particular task, and then they report being less anxious. So you can manipulate their emotions and things. But whether you could do something like suggest you're limping and now you make a person limp, go for it.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you all.